Well, grace unto you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. How many of you have ever had that person come up to you at the perfect time with the perfect words, sharing something with you that you needed to hear in that moment? Maybe God's used you to be able to share that with others as well. Today we're talking about our word gifts. And looking back at the last few weeks, we're focusing in on the gifts, the spiritual gifts that God gives his believers. And so I'm curious today, as we look back and as we look forward, on the backside of your bulletins, there's 6 more spiritual gifts that are listed. And I'm wondering if you could glance at them with me and know that this is what we're going to be focusing in on today. These word gifts that matter so deeply for us as individuals and for the body of Christ as a whole. Now, Paul says this in Ephesians chapter 4. He says, "So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up." When you start to think about these spiritual gifts that we have, we might assume that some are more important than others, usually the gifts that other people have. We start to look at ourselves in the mirror and feel a little bit smaller than those around us. I think that's human nature sometimes. We start to assume that God can't possibly use us in important ways for the kingdom. But truthfully, God is wanting all of us to be able to live into our gifts, so that others will be able to realize just what it is that Christ has done on their behalf. And so Paul tells us that there's the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers. And just like we've realized in high school and college, it's not best for us to cram for the test the night before. No, God is calling us to get to know these gifts, to get to know him and find ways that we're able to best live out these gifts in the world. This is what we're invited into. Peter continues this in our preaching text today by telling us to be ready, not just to defend, but to do it the right way. I like to have this visual of him being in court, and he's trying to convince everybody there that this is the way. And folks are going to have their opinions, and truthfully, the court of public opinion for us as well as Christians, when we live out our faith and when we tell people and point them through the words that we have to what God is doing in our lives, they're going to be judging us a bit as well. But Peter's telling us to be ready, be prepared, get to know God and get to know our gifts to the best of our ability. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 6 gifts that we're going to be focusing in on today. And I'm wondering, as you're following along and jotting down some notes on your back page, maybe one of these gifts is your sweet spot this morning. We start off with teachers. Now, teachers don't proclaim as much as they unpack. And I'm sure we all have a great memory of a teacher that walked alongside us while we were growing up, right? If we're honest, we probably have a few teachers that come to mind that weren't so good at that as well. But we are so grateful when teachers find their sweet spot, when they're able to live into the gifts that they have, and not just talk at you, but truly walk alongside you in the journey of learning and unpack things so that you can understand them and grow in understanding. This is a beautiful thing. For those of us looking at it from a spiritual lens, they help us to better understand themes and principles of Scripture. For me, I can think back, 3rd grade, Shelley Bacher, Sunday school, Grace Lutheran Church, Apple Valley, Minnesota. That woman was a saint because she had me in her class. And I'm sure that, I haven't seen her in a number of years. I have to imagine she'd be surprised that I'm a pastor today. I'm surprised I'm a pastor today. But God is good. God uses people in their gifts to walk alongside us in our journey. And when I look back at the folks that were in my class with me, we were a wild bunch. She was patient. She prayed for us. She wanted us to understand the themes of faith, and she planted a seed in my life and in the lives of many of my classmates as well. I'm grateful for who she was and that she was willing to step up and be a teacher for us. Because teaching is an important thing. We know this in the education system. We know when we don't have good teachers, when we don't have good education. And I think that's the case in the church as well. We're so grateful that folks step up and share their gifts so that others can be empowered to learn and grow for kingdom purposes. You might be wondering today if this is where your gift is at, and I'd say check the fruit. If you start to see that the things that you're sharing with people are starting to come to fruition, even if it's down the line like Shelley with me, I'm grateful for the ways that we can see the things that we've shared are starting to come into fruition in our lives. I look back at the last year of church school and seeing all those great leaders that have walked alongside our students. There's a couple hundred kids in that program. There's no way that Julie is able to do that on her own. No, we know that it's important to be able to find those folks that have the gift, to equip them and set them free to share it with others. Now, the next one, if you're not feeling like you're a teacher, it might just be encouragement. For me, it's the rah-rah, right? It's being able to encourage us in our journey, and we all need those people. When you start to think about the person who has the right word to say at the right time, the person who's saying, I am so proud of you. I know your name and I'm praying for you. How are things going? And being able to follow up on those. The gift of encouragement goes such a long way, not just in the church, but in life in general. It helps with the process of putting what we've learned or experienced from our teachers into action. And it's less about clarifying and more about applying. Whether we're beginning or continuing on our faith journey, we all need the encouragement to continue on. Now, Paul, he was all about mutual encouragement. He knew how important it was for himself to be encouraged, and so he passed that along to others as well. When we're encouraging, we have the opportunity to do a little bit of teaching. We correct as needed, but we encourage and comfort. And we do this by being present, by offering appropriate and timely advice to people that trust us. And honestly, this is when it starts to come naturally for us. It's not a big step out of our comfort zone to have the right word to say in the right moment. We come alongside others to strengthen, to reassure, to console, and to encourage. And even if this isn't our gift, we know the way that we want to be treated, and so we try to find those ways to encourage others in their journey as well. Now, if you're following along on the back page, this next one probably makes you a little nervous because you're like, Pastor, I am not an apostle. Good. There were the 12 apostles, the folks that walked alongside Jesus, those disciples. But the gift of apostleship continues to be with us today. And for me, it's the ministry that is set aside, the stuff that doesn't necessarily take place here in our building, but the ministry that is sent out for our members to be able to live into their gifts so that all may know. And while people aren't called directly to be an apostle, the DNA of the apostles, the disciples, is here and alive and well in a variety of ways. It's a call by Jesus, an affirmation from the church to simply go and live into your calling. You're sent to be a messenger, using your God-given abilities to create new ministries and ways to serve outside of the traditional church. Now, for us, I've seen this continue to grow and develop through the last year and a half. One of these great examples is our second site, downtown Fargo Sanctuary Event Center. We have a bunch of great leaders there, lay leaders, volunteers, people who aren't getting paid a dime, who continue to show up each and every week because they have it on their heart to meet people where they're at, to share grace and hope, peace and love with people directly where they're at. And a lot of the folks that come there, some of them are from Good Shepherd Moorhead. They found that to be a place they enjoy worshiping. But each and every week, this morning included, there were so many first-time faces. And that excites me because that means that the Spirit is driving folks into this place, taking a step outside of their comfort zone. And if we don't have folks to meet them where they're at, we're almost a gateway or a hindrance to folks being able to experience what God might have planned in that space. And so I'm grateful for our folks that continue to show up faithfully, continue to live into their gifts. Mitch and Jesse especially, folks that are volunteering their time to walk alongside our leaders and equip them so that we can really step up and be present for those that are guests and for our members as well. This last week, Mitch and Jesse had a basketball camp here as well. We had over 50 kids that were here, and they were not all members of Good Shepherd. It's a side door ministry opportunity. I think of Young Life. I think of our jail ministry. I think of folks that are taking those steps outside of maybe even their comfort zone a little bit to be used by God. And when they take that initial step, they start to realize the gifts that they have, the impact that they can make, the ways that God might just use them in the world. And so if you have vision, if you have ways to be able to be the church outside these walls, come talk to Pastor Mary and I. We'd love to hear what God's up to in your life and find ways for you to be the church for others. Our next one is leadership. We're going from apostleship, which makes us a little nervous, to leadership, which some of us crave, I'd say. But leadership is all about the what and the where, and not necessarily the how. If you have good leadership skills, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you're craving for power, if you're craving for stature, or simply to be the person, you might not have the gift of leadership. It's not about the how, it's about the what and the where. It's about the vision and not the implementation. It's being able to cast a vision, to find folks and equip them and set them free to live it out like wildfire. When I start to think of these gifts, if you're holding on to all the power, if you're not passing it along, you're not living into the leadership. No, we're invited to pray, to give vision, to name, to equip, and to delegate. When I look out at this church, I see a ton of leaders. And it's not just about folks that you might see up front, but it's the folks that are leading from the pews, leading from out here, being a part of the ministries, and then being sent out of this building to lead in our communities, in our jobs, in our neighborhoods, wherever it is that God might have us. You're following along. Our next one is being a pastor. Now, Pastor Mary and I, we're grateful for calls here to be a pastor. We are in the process of looking for a third pastor as well. Maybe they're out there, I'm not sure. There's lots of hoops to jump through, but we'd love to have you. But the beauty is this: whether you're called as a pastor or not, there are folks in this place that have the gifts of being a pastor. Because we worship like 750 throughout the year here at Good Shepherd, 2,500 or more members. This is a reality. I'm a pretty poor pastor for all of those people. There's no way that I can possibly meet expectations for every single person if I'm looking at it from that lens. But the beauty is this: God has called each and every one of us into these different gifts, and some of you have that gift for being a pastor, for walking alongside folks that are in a difficult time in life. As Lutherans, we believe that we are a priesthood of all believers. And so that means that God might just have you have these very gifts for this very moment to meet people where they're at. And that excites me. More importantly, as the church, it's not all about the pastors. The church is the people. And so as I look out and I look at these various gifts, being a teacher, being an encourager, an apostle, a leader, a pastor, these are all things that are a part of lifting up our body of Christ, like Paul said in Ephesians. We all have a purpose, and we all need to be able to fire on all cylinders to be able to make this work. Finally, today, our last one is evangelism. And I feel like all of these gifts kind of evolve into evangelism, because what we're doing here is pointing people toward the love of God. And as we use our word gifts, evangelism is the opportunity to communicate the gospel in a relevant way, a way that the people on the receiving end are able to experience it and have life transformation from within. It's verbal proclamation, and it's something that's not just lived within us, but it's shared freely with others. Now, the body of Christ as a whole, we are called to share this with others. But for some of us, it's our sweet spot. It's our bread and butter. It's our opportunity to get up in front of others or have one-on-one conversations with maybe even complete strangers, and to be able to share our faith boldly in ways that don't condemn, that don't make us be divided, but instead remind us of how we are for one another and draw us in that way. God is at work in our lives, and the call for us to evangelize points to exactly what God is doing in the here and now. And Dallas Willard has this quote: "The gospel is less about how to get into the kingdom of heaven after you die, and more about how to live in the kingdom of heaven before you die." I'll say it one more time. The gospel is less about how to get into the kingdom of heaven after you die, and more about how to live in the kingdom of heaven before you die. I think all too often we focus so much on the future that we miss out on the here and now. We're trying to lead people toward what God hasn't planned for us down the road, that we miss what God is doing in our lives right here and now today, as the church, as individuals. And so I wonder, how are you living into your gifts today to point others toward what God is doing in the here and now? Have you started to ponder what these gifts might be for you and how you can better live them out in the church and as the church? Because we know that the good news is news that is worth sharing. And so we need to get to know it. Like Peter is asking us, we need to be able to defend it in a way that people are able to clearly understand. And so how do we get to know God in our gifts in ways that are real and authentic for us? I recently had the opportunity to learn from the great theologian Adam Thielen. Maybe you're familiar with him. At 1 Million Cups last week, him and his wife were sharing about their heart for meeting people and meeting needs in the community. And one of the things that was mentioned there was you have to be brilliant at the basics. You have to be brilliant at the basics. If we just have this encyclopedia of faith where we have all this head knowledge and no heart experience, no transformation, and no ways that we're being sent out to share it with others, we're not actually living into the call that God has for us. And sometimes if we're not all there with the head knowledge, we feel as though we are not equipped that we're not prepared, that we're not good enough to go out and share these gifts with others. What we need to be is brilliant at the basics. We need to be comfortable with the gifts and call that God has in our lives and be willing to take that step to share it with others. Finally, I'll leave you with a quote from Elizabeth Eaton, the bishop of our denomination. I was at a conference and she said this: "The most important thing is to make the most important thing the most important thing." Think on that for one sec. The most important thing is to make the most important thing the most important thing. We as a church are called to point others toward Jesus. Our gather, grow, and go message is about what we do in everything. And so when we look back at these calls to be teachers and encouragers, apostles and leaders, pastors and evangelists, we take these calls seriously. It might not be the easiest thing for us to do, but we know that God is calling us to do it. We know what Christ has done on our behalf, and we know that the Spirit goes with us. And so as the church, I want to encourage you to find those ways to live into your gifts, both here in this space and to be sent out to share it with others so that all may know. And for that I say, thanks be to God. Amen.